Hi there. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Cory Redekop. I'm the CEO here at the Greater Langley Chamber of Commerce. We're Langley's largest business association. We represent almost 1,200 businesses in Langley Township and City. And thanks for coming to our Chamber Talks video here. We're joined today with Chad, Gerson, and Braeden Wiens with LK Law, which is one of our great partner of the Chamber. They're a longstanding Chamber member and an important part of our business community here. And they're celebrating their 45th anniversary as a law firm practicing here. So we're thrilled to have them join us. And we're just going to chat a little bit about kind of what the landscape is on law issues facing businesses and employers, a little bit of employment law, some general overview. And but guys, thanks so much for taking the chance, taking the time to chat with us and share some knowledge for our members.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much for having us, Cory. We're happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, first, let me start by saying this is a discussion on best practices, tips, pitfalls, kind of what's changing in business and employment law. But it's a discussion, nothing more, everybody. So this should not be construed as legal advice, or and if you have actual questions, you should consult some actual legal experts for consultations. And here's two of them that you can maybe follow up with afterwards for actual advice on your specific situations. We're just chatting about what it should be on the radar for businesses. So with that out of the way, why don't we get started? Chad, I'll start with you, maybe kind of on a kind of maybe a bigger picture on the business law side. I know coming into effect sometime this year, I don't think I've seen a date on it, is kind of a whole new way of managing BC companies. There's a change to the BC Business Corporations Act, primarily focused on enhancing transparency and corporate accountability. Can you share a little bit about that's what the government says. Can you share a little bit about what the changes we're expecting to see, or what they will be, and kind of what that would matter for a local business in Langley?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cory. So I guess everybody's pretty well aware that in the last several years, there have been a lot of attempts to clamp down on things like money laundering and also enforcing the rules about foreign ownership of certain assets, particularly residential property. And in an effort to do that, the government has done a number of things to increase the transparency of ownership. So they introduced the landowner transparency register a few years ago, and they also introduced a corporate transparency register. Until now, the corporate transparency register has been purely an internal record of the company, and it would only be available to the government or to government agencies if there was some kind of investigation. But there have been recent changes to the BC Business Corporations Act. They've been passed by the legislature, they've received royal assent, and now we're at the stage where the registry is working on implementing those changes. So they are coming down the pike, 100% sure that they're coming down the pike. We don't know exactly what the implementation is going to look like, but from the guidance that we've received, it's clear that we're going to, every company owner of a BC company is going to have to provide additional transparency information. And now some of that information, this is the key change, some of that information is now going to be publicly available. And that means that it will be publicly available who are the principal owners of a corporation. And that includes if a corporation, a lot of people have a holding company that owns another company, or they might have their companies owned in certain structures like trusts, for example, or partnerships. And the transparency rules are designed to dig down into those structures and find the actual individuals behind those structures. So there will be a certain amount of every company owner's information publicly available. And although this is going to be implemented shortly, the government isn't always great at giving guidance on how to comply with it for people who don't deal with this stuff every day and who aren't experts. And we can foresee that it's going to increase the difficulty of trying to do these kind of things yourself, keep your own business records, for example. And it's going to cause some difficulty for people who are trying to navigate the changes without legal advice.
Well, that's as soon as you're speaking, that's the first thing that jumps to mind. So there's been a few of these. I think like the landowner transparency registry or something like, and I'm trying to remember all the acronyms now. There's been a few of these transparency things, and I remember them being a bit of a nightmare as they rolled out on how to actually file and the dates and the information even provided to people like yourselves were changing. So do we have a sense? Have they learned their lesson on that? Do we have a sense that we might get a bit of a straighter runway on this?
Well, we can always hope that they've learned their
Okay.
lesson.
Fingers
If you
crossed.
recall the original landowner transparency, the implementation was actually delayed from the original implementation date because there was so much confusion around it, and it was very difficult for people to prepare. And eventually, the implementation did go forward. There are still a lot of people who are not compliant. And
Yeah.
there are still a lot of people who are not compliant with the current corporate transparency rules. But it's going to be difficult, perhaps impossible, not to be compliant with the ongoing corporate transparency rules now that the changes have been made, because we're anticipating that you'll have to upload or enter this information somehow just to keep your company in good standing. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but that's the model that that Corporations Canada is used if you have a federally incorporated corporation, and that's the direction where things are headed. So we anticipate that BC is going to implement something like that too. And the rules for determining exactly who is a significant individual who has to go on the transparency register they can be a little tricky. If you just own your own company with, a few individual shareholders or one shareholder, that's very straightforward. But if you have any kind of structure like holding companies or people holding different classes of shares, for example, or trusts or partnerships or any kind of structure like that, the rules for determining exactly what needs to be disclosed can be a little bit tricky. And that's where I think a lot of people are going to run into problems.
Exactly. So, and that'll be where it might not be worth the what does it say? The juice might not be worth the squeeze to try to do this yourself and try to get some advice. So, do we know? Do we have do we have an idea this is coming in May, in November? Like how quickly should people be putting this on their radar?
It is coming, either later this spring or perhaps early in the summer.
Okay.
There have been updates circulated to some of the professionals who are going to be affected. Our corporate services team has been briefed by the registry about some of the changes that are going to be implemented soon. But even at that time, there were still some decisions left to be made by the registry, according to what the information they gave us. But we expect to receive notice basically at any time about the implementation. And at a minimum, every year when your annual renewal for your company comes up to keep your company in good standing, you're going to have to demonstrate compliance with those rules. So, one thing that we do is we have a team of corporate services paralegals who are great at keeping track of these things and making sure that all of our companies are compliant, and they know how to pick the information out and make sure that our clients are compliant. And now that the information is going to be publicly available, well, not only will you not be able to keep your company in good standing without being compliant, but there are some fairly stiff penalties potentially for non-compliance, up to $50,000 fine and possibly even jail time, although realistically, that's only going to come into play if somebody is doing this for the purpose of hiding, some kind of crime or money laundering or something like that. They're not going to come down like that on just a business owner who, made a mistake or isn't compliant. But nonetheless, it's going to be a pain in the neck for everybody. And, we suggest getting advice to make sure that you're compliant.
I think that's the thing. Like make understanding what your corporate structure is. Make sure you have this is going to be on the radar so that you're finding out. Yeah, and the chamber can maybe we can work together as once we hear this coming out, we can make sure that we're doing some communication, make sure our members know, okay, this is now the runway on this, and here's what you need to be aware of. But okay, well, thanks for that. And it sounds so it's all corporation structure. So I'm assuming if anybody obviously are not for profit members or governed differently, and anyone who's like a sole prop, that would be a whole different kettle of fish. So this is corporations, right?
Well, that's true. But other structures such as societies and partnerships are governed by their own acts, the Societies Act
Yeah.
and the Partnership Act. And to a certain extent, it's always there are some different requirements for those structures compared to corporations. Obviously, most business in BC is done through corporations. But if there's any doubt in your mind at all, I think the best thing to do is to get some advice, because it's better to be compliant and instead of you're trying to do something, maybe you're doing a financing, maybe you're doing a purchase of property or a sale of property or some other kind of transaction, and then some outside party asks for your transparency information, and then all of a sudden you don't have it and you're scrambling to figure out how to become compliant, right?
And that's the thing. You get it all your ducks in a row now. Otherwise, these things bubble up and they kind of scuttle a deal or get you in trouble somewhere else or slow something else down at a later point. Okay, good to know. So, okay, well everyone, so watch your calendars for the BC Business Corporation Act change implementations, and we'll help communicate on that. Braeden, I'm coming to you next on the employment side. I know there's not been a ton of change, but a few things kind of trickling out and a few things that have been happening over the last couple of years on employment law. But kind of the thing that jumped to my mind is just we know how much uncertainty there's been over the last couple of months with tariffs and on again, off again, and recession on again, off again. And I know we've shared some information around kind of work sharing with EI and some different structures people and strategies businesses can play with if they're having to look at maybe reducing a shift or if they end up having to maybe lay people off or furlough, those types of things. Did you want to talk a little bit about kind of all this uncertainty and what employers maybe should be considering if they're looking at if changing kind of their employment levels, given the uncertainty, kind of what should be on their radar for making sure they don't step wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right there. It is uncertain right now. There's a lot of discussions over, what is the economy going to look like? We have an election upcoming here very shortly. And probably one of the biggest voter turnouts we'll have in Canadian history. And so I think that's telling as to how much engagement we have with the public right now as to, how much interest do we have in this economy? And people are worried, they're concerned. And so we are seeing that reflected in the litigation market. There is significant, employees and employers getting into disputes over wrongful termination, wrongful layoffs, constructive dismissal, which then results in a lot of disputes arising between these parties. And so the major thing you'll hear out of employment lawyers is just, we harp this all along, have an employment contract in place so that you have certainty. Every single time you have an employment relationship, it's either going to be codified by an implied or inferred contract, like a verbal arrangement, which is never best, or you'll have a written contract, which is what we always suggest having. The reason you want to have that written contract is in times like this, we've got uncertainty with the tariffs. Is the US going to hammer us even harder? Our business is going to have to scale down and adjust their workforce. And you want to be able to lay off or possibly terminate employees without having to get hammered with this huge bill. What's called common law notice, which is a lot more the employment standards notice. We've touched on that in the chamber here with a lot of employers. How do you calculate notice? And this is a whole different thing that you can discuss, but it's all mitigated as long as you have a written employment contract. Now, obviously, as employers, you've got a lot to navigate in this market. If you want to lay off, you can't lay off for more than 13 weeks in a 20-week period. Otherwise, you're dismissing that employee. If you don't have that written employment contract, you're going to be paying them 1 month per year of service. So you don't want to be dinged with that bill. So, touching base with our team or another legal team out there and the chamber for guidance on how you can do that is obviously the first step. But also, there's other requirements out there that you as employers have to be considerate of. We've got changes happening in the market left or right now. We've got sick leave amendments. We've got the Pay Transparency Act. Obviously, as Chad just discussed, there's a whole whackload of transparency requirements coming out from our government right now. And so staying on top of those things are going to be key to your success as a business and a small business. So.
Well, and I think that's, and we've chatted about this in the past, and we've done some sessions on, and just if you don't have something written down, then you open yourself up to this idea of common law, and you can't just rely on the minimums sometimes that are over here. There's if you go to if you get sued or you go to a mitigation or something, mediation, you're opening yourself up to a much greater risk than if you'd followed the rules. So I think that's, if nothing else, like, yeah, put things on paper, like have things actually written down so everyone knows what the rules are, the kind of the rules of the game. And then also, I guess people should know some of those numbers you quoted there, like a layoff can only amount to a certain amount of time, or know like what's a constructive dismissal. Like if you can't just change people's job descriptions too much. Like have an understanding of what some of these terms mean, so that you know kind of what a path looks like for you if you have to go through a few months of kind of retooling or winding things down while the economy sorts itself out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think just being aware that the napkin arrangements will get you in trouble is the first step. A lot of people, and in fairness, you open up yourself small business, you're excited. You've got this market that you're just engaging in. You got customers that are reaching out to you. Things are flying. You need a couple employees, and before you know it, you've got a workforce of 10 individuals, and none of them have contracts. But you're off to the races. But maybe one of them is just a rotten duck, and you need to get rid of them, or it's just not working out with your business. Knowing those things before you go in, you're light years ahead of a lot of people in that situation, so that will help you out.
Well, and that's one of the things we see this a lot of time. Yeah, as you said, business scales quicker than you thought, or things are going, and a lot you can kind of hold the fort down for a long time with kind of gum and sticky tape and things, but eventually, if something breaks loose, that's when you kind of notice those not having those things to fall back on. So if you can carve out a few hours, I know entrepreneurs and business owners have no time, but if you can carve out a little bit of time to make sure that you're at least getting kind of the structure, the building blocks in place, if something goes sideways later on, it'll be a lot less painful, I'm sure.
But it's not even just going sideways for yourself. And Chad will attest to this, doing mergers and acquisitions. If you're selling your business and you've got a workforce that isn't papered up, you've got significant liabilities you're going to have to disclose to the buying party or the vendor. As the vendor, you've got a lot of liability there on the books. When you go through a transaction, there's going to be a couple different arrangements. Depends on how you do it, as an asset or a share agreement. You've got to make sure that you've got employment contracts in place, because there's going to be a continuity of employment with this new buyer coming into your business. And you want to make sure that they know and are well advised, and it's not going to cause a hiccup right at the last minute for the sale of your business. And so, there's a lot of considerations out right now of, or should I sell my business? Is this a good time to get out? And so, obviously it's going to be tough to get employment contracts in right at the last minute, but there's ways to do it. You obviously offer some more money to your workforce, but it is something to consider if you are maybe thinking about either dialing into business or maybe selling off. Check your employment contracts. Make sure that you've got everything in order.
That's an interesting point, because I know I was just chatting with a couple of businesses who are looking to kind of retire or scale down, and yeah, so for those people who might, even if it's on the horizon of that's your exit plan, you're saying that it's best to make sure, yeah, the new owners coming in are going to want to know, do you have everything to the letter, or am I taking on, I guess, risk that something sideways is going to happen here?
Absolutely, yeah. And especially if you've been around for a long time, you've got employees who have been there for 20 plus years. That's something that is going to be looked at for a buyer when they take a look at your business.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Chad, did you want anything to add on that kind of sale piece of kind of how kind of having your processes and your kind of your stuff up to snuff on a business transaction matters?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cory. So I do a lot of work in representing clients who are selling their businesses or who are buying businesses, and there are many things to consider depending on the nature of the business and the scope of the business. But one of those things definitely is the situation with regard to the employees. Are there written contracts in place? What's the potential liability that the buyer is taking on? Does the seller seem to have all their ducks in a row as far as say the employment potential liability, and going back to what I mentioned before, compliance with all of the various regulations that that apply to their business, including the corporate transparency. If a buyer looks at the seller's records and can't make heads or tails of them, then that's going to create additional work for the lawyers, and that means additional expense. It's always better to try and build a solid foundation, do things right from the beginning, and it will serve you well down the road when you're looking to sell.
No, for sure. Geez. Well, lots of things for our members to be considering. I know we're galloping towards time here. Braeden, I want to come back to you in a couple, because you mentioned a couple of things there on pay transparency. I know, so we mentioned lots of transparency things today. So that pay transparency governs how you have to post salaries and what you can ask about. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about that piece, and then anything that's going around. I know there's a small change on coming on sick leave and doctor's notes and things, but those are a couple of paid sick days and pay transparency, or some newer rules that have come in the last couple of years. Anything that we should be reminding businesses and employers that they should be doing to make sure that they're not falling foul of those rules?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, pay transparency has been a hot topic for employers in the last 2-ish years now since it came out. And we are nearing towards that date now where more employers are probably going to have to be doing the reporting requirements. Before, it's been on the periphery. You've had public agencies and people who employ over 1,000 people. So it's not really impacted, most of the companies that you would engage with on a daily basis. But now next year, I mean, we're at 300 plus employees this year that have to be reporting, and then next year it's down to 50 plus, and we still don't have the actual requirements that they're going to be asking of companies that have 50 or less. But I would expect it's probably going to be similar to what we've had so far under this current legislation. The NDP seem to be following through with a lot of their promises here on these transparencies type legislation. So, making sure that you take a look at the reporting requirements. It's called a BCE ID, signing up for that, because, your report you have to put on either your website or have it posted in a workplace, essentially doing your quartiles, like what percentage of your workforce has what, for salary and gender gaps. And there's a variety of different steps you have to go through to make that report. So keeping that in the back of your mind, that as an employer of maybe 50 plus people, or even if you are 300 plus people, that'll be coming up this year or next. Again, yeah, you touched on it, Cory, as well. The sick leave requirements. Now, obviously, a little one, Bill 11 just got announced here that they're going to be probably getting rid of the doctor's notes. So you can't be asking for a doctor's note from your employee before what's called, short-term illnesses. So right now we're talking about what is an adequate or short-term time frame. They're going to be engaging stakeholders on that to determine what that looks like. Because obviously right now you got 5 paid and 3 unpaid days for sick leave, but are they going to be changing that requirement? There has been rumblings for a while that we'll be changing how many sick days that you're actually allowed to have for paid leave. And, that's obviously been amended recently as well. But the Employment Standards Act, I think, is going to be up in the air. As we go through the next few years here, employees' rights are going to be increasing. It's just a recognition of the times, of the government that we have in place. And so you as an employer, it's good to stay advised of these sorts of things. Do I think it's going to really impact that much not having doctor's notes? I think the current government is maybe overstating how much of an impact it's going to have, because at the end of the day, you're not going to deny anyone for sick leave at this point. That's just not recommended. But maybe people are going to take advantage of it. And so it's something to keep in mind, because we don't know quite what it's going to look like yet as far as what that shortened period is going to be defined as.
Yeah, one of the things that the chamber's been very clear on the impacts that paid sick leave has had on businesses, especially those in retail and hospitality, where you have to backfill a position. And yeah, we'll be watching this very closely, because I find it odd that we would need to define short-term sick leave when we're talking about 5 days. That sounds like something you need to define if we're talking about 10 days. So we're watching that very closely, because that would be a big concern for us. And the pay transparency, yeah, there's rules around what you have to post on job things, what you're allowed to ask candidates and employees, and those types of things. But yeah, that reporting structure. Also, we've been advocating to the government to wipe the 50 person limit, because we think that's just far too small. But that's coming not this November, but next. So there's always more to watch for businesses in this space. I think we've just scratched the surface on kind of some of these changes. Transparency Act coming in with BC Business Corporations Act, making sure you have your legal employment structures in place, employment contracts, especially if you're looking to sell. And just making sure that you're staying abreast. Watch the chamber newsletter and our communications. We try to make sure that we're communicating these things, but staying up to date on what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, because those have been changing. I've been in this position in chambers for 14 years, and the last couple have seen a way more changes on what you're allowed to do, where you can suddenly find yourself stepping wrong where you never would have had that before. We've seen way more changes, in my opinion, in the last couple of years than we did the 10 before. So guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us. And give some more information. Were any last comments or last minute things you wanted to add to anyone watching here?
Yeah, no, just keep apprised and keep an eye on the news. Obviously, follow the updates from the chamber here as well. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out to ourselves or those at the chamber, and we're always here available to connect. We're obviously very appreciative of our connection partnership here with the Greater Langley Chamber of Commerce, but just keep apprised of the changes and watch the news.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank you, Cory, for having us on for this discussion. And at LK Law, we're always available to talk to business owners or anybody who needs advice. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it. And we appreciate the good work that you do at the chamber. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, guys. I appreciate your time. LK Law is a great partner of the chamber, and yeah, as I said at the beginning, this was just a discussion on issues. But if anything's got you percolating now, these are some guys that you can come and reach out to and get some advice and make sure that your business is protected. So awesome. We'll leave it there. Thanks. I appreciate you guys' time, and we'll chat again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.